Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Denise. If this is your first time here, hi. I like to make videos about astrology and what it looks like in real life. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, I invite you to subscribe to my channel. In today's video, we're gonna be talking about the dark side of Pisces. This is gonna be the start of a series. I was really inspired by something that I read, and I'm gonna be talking about it later in the video. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, I invite you to stick around. So I just want to preface this by saying that if you're on this channel, then that means that you're pretty smart and you don't stereotype using the signs. So if you know that, if you've been to my channel before, you know that I don't stereotype using the signs. So that's not what today's video is about. Just because you share a sign with a serial killer does not mean that you yourself are a serial killer. I also want to preface this, I always have to do this, but I am not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a police officer, I'm not a lawyer, I am just an astrologer, and I like to talk about astrology in real life and how the signs and planets can play out for a person in real life. So that's what we're going to be doing in today's video. So for this series, I'm going to be focusing in on one specific trait for each of the signs, and focusing on that one trait, I'm going to be dissecting it and kind of pulling out the negative and the positive of that one particular trait. So first, I'm going to be talking about the trait, the positive side first, get that out of the way. Then we're going to go into the negative side and really magnify that negative side to talk about the person that we're going to be talking about. This is a very infamous celebrity in the state of Texas. I'm not sure how popular he is outside of Texas, but it is Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. So Richard Ramirez was not only a super mega ultra Pisces, but he also had several aspects to Neptune. And as you'll see, that plays a really important role into the development of his personality. So without further ado, let's get into the video, guys. So the trait that I'm going to be choosing for Pisces that could really go either way is the trait of vulnerability. So vulnerability is one of the things that makes Pisces so lovable. Pisces' vulnerability really makes them very open-hearted, and it's this open-heartedness that invites others to come in and love them so much and be attracted to them, because that kind of energy is just very inviting. If somebody's very open to you, then you have a tendency to want to go into whatever it is that they're opening. And in the case of Pisces, it's their heart that they're opening. I also talk about Pisces being very susceptible, kind of like a mood ring. So I always say that you can know how the vibe is in a room based on how the Pisces is doing. And that is really because they adapt to the environment that they're in. And that means that their mood is really affected by the moods of those people who are around them. They're also very yielding, and this yielding has to do with that susceptibility and that vulnerability. Anything that is ruled by Neptune or touched by Neptune is going to be very permeable. So I've said this before, but Neptune really acts like, you know, a membrane around you that is really porous. So the people who have Pisces in their chart have a very permeable membrane, and that is what allows them to be so susceptible, so vulnerable, and open to other people, because they don't have a real barrier there. It is really open, and energy can flow in and out of them very easily. Lastly, they are without boundaries, and this is a really beautiful thing, because when somebody doesn't have boundaries, it makes other people feel welcome. And really, even healthy boundaries can really cut people off. So even if you have a very healthy level of boundaries to protect you from other people, or to really just draw a line in the sand, like, hey, you can't cross this line, Pisces doesn't have that. Pisces is completely open. And for some reason, that is just very inviting, because it's like they're an extension of you. And that is very intriguing and attractive to other people. Some people in particular, but just in general, it is attractive. So Pisces people, it's that same trait of vulnerability and them just being able to match our energy that makes them so lovable. It's why whenever we are doing well and we're happy, they're our biggest cheerleaders. They just take our energy and just magnify it, and they'll be really happy for us. Or if we're really sad, they'll just be right there with us without trying to make anything better. They'll just be there with you in your negative feelings. And that can act as a permission slip for other people to just be as sad as they feel. And that just invitation from Pisces to be okay with your feelings is really another thing that makes them very attractive. Okay, but what's negative about this trait of vulnerability and permeability? What is negative about it? So having no boundaries really makes you susceptible to all kinds of harm. There are people out there who will want to exploit this quality just to see what would happen. So there are people that are just gonna want to put you on the wrong path in order to see how dark you can get. They're just very turned on by the kind of power that they feel over you because they see that they're able to affect you so much. And because you're obviously affected by them, then they are really attracted to that. And it's very enticing to try to harm a person like that. Another negative thing about this trait is that you can be entirely consumed by the energy around you. So this could be positive or negative, but in the positive, let's just say you're surrounded by beauty, you're surrounded by love, then you can have the potential to become a really amazing artist. I think of Billie Eilish, and she's a rising Pisces, and I always talk about her when I think about the perfect environment for a Pisces. You're surrounded by musicians, by artists, by people who are spiritual and loving, then you are going to take that and magnify it. But if you're surrounded by darkness and pain and violence, then you are going to take that, be consumed by it, and amplify it. And this is one of those nature versus nurture sort of things. And I know that there's gonna be people who are gonna be like, Denise, I'm a Pisces and I was abused when I was a child and I'm not the night stalker. Well, that's true, but you have to look at the chart as a whole, and not only that, but you just have to look at the environment that the person was growing up in. This is more of that nature versus nurture thing, but like I said, it could go any of the two ways. And the one caveat for Pisces people is that even if they're surrounded by darkness and just violence and pain, if they have one person or one place they could go to where they can just kind of bring themselves back to life or come back home to themselves with that one person that could bring them joy again and give them hope, then they'll be okay. And if that's the case for you, if you were a Pisces and you experienced a lot of pain throughout your life or a lot of trauma, but you had that one person you can go to, you can probably attest to that person essentially saved you. And that's really how it feels for a Pisces person to have just one glimmer of hope. That's really all that they need to continue being their amazing angelic selves that they actually are. But if they don't have that one person or place they could go to, then they could really end up being lost. And essentially that's what I think happened to Richard Ramirez. And that's what we're gonna be talking about in today's video. So now I'm gonna give you a little bit of background. I'm not gonna be talking too much about the crimes themselves. If you're interested in the crimes, then there are a lot of videos talking about them and information on the internet. I'm just essentially concerned with his life and what I think really made him who he became. So Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas on February 29th, 1960, and he was the youngest of 5 children. His dad used to be a police officer in Juarez, Mexico. And really, if you know anything about Mexico, you know that Juarez is a pretty hardcore place. And the cops from Juarez, cops in Mexico, period, are very hardcore. They're not anything like the cops that you know here in the United States. And I know that we have a lot of tension in the media, apparent tension, with police officers and thinking that they're corrupt or that they're evil. And I'm not going to make a statement about that. But what I will say as a Mexican, I was born in Mexico and I grew up in Mexico, and I had family members, one family member who was a police officer and knew several. Law enforcement in Mexico is very different from law enforcement here. It is just very dark, very 8th house. That is how I can describe law enforcement in Mexico. So his father used to be a policeman, and he was really prone to fits of anger and violence against his entire family. It is said that Richard began sleeping in a local cemetery to get away from just the violence that he had at home. And when he didn't go to the cemetery, he would go to his cousin Mike's house. He was an older guy. He was like his cool older cousin. Well, Mike was a US Army Green Beret combat veteran who would really just boast and show off to Richard of all of his exploits during the Vietnam War. And he would go about and tell him like these stories of all these women that he raped and murdered, and he would even show him pictures of some of his victims. And when he was telling all these stories to Richard was 12, 13 years old. So just start putting that in the back of your head as to what kind of impression this could have on a child so young. It's around this time when he was around 10 years old, when he started hanging around with his cousin, that he started smoking weed. And it is said that the two of them bonded over a joint and talking about these gruesome war stories. Then when Richard was 13 years old, he was there when his cousin Mike shot and killed his wife Jessie. He shot her in the face, and Richard was there. And the family said that after that event, he became very withdrawn and kind of depressed and really isolated himself from the rest of the family. I wonder why. And later that same year, when he was still 13, he moved into his sister's house, his older sister, to kind of, I guess, get away from all of that situation. He moved in with his sister, and his sister happened to have a husband who was a total creep. He was actually a peeping Tom, so those people that go and look through people's windows, try to look for women or girls that are undressing. And that's what his sister's husband was doing, and he would take him along at the age of 13. So Mike, the murderous cousin, the one who shot the wife in the face, he was found not guilty for reason of insanity, and he was released from a mental state hospital after 4 years. And so let's do the math. He was around, that means that Richard was around 16, 17 years old when the cousin is released. And it is said that Mike, his cousin, kept being a really important part of his life once he was out. And during this time, Richard also began using LSD. So you're mixing pain, violence, rape, mental illness, and now hard drugs. Like, just one thing is weed, and then LSD is like a whole other thing. So as he entered adolescence, he was undoubtedly influenced by the vicious surroundings that he was growing up in, and it doesn't make a genius to figure out why he was so affected by these things. So he was developing his sexuality, and he was going through all of these situations with the people in his family that aren't very traditional or very normal, to say the least. When he was 15 or 16 years old, it is said that he was still in school when this happened, but he was working at a local Holiday Inn, and he essentially used the key from working there, and he broke into a couple's room when the husband wasn't there. He tried to rape the woman, and her husband walked in and stopped the attack from taking place, thank God, and beat him up. And essentially, this seems to have stopped Richard for a little while, because his really reign of terror didn't start for a few years later. In 1984, he went on a killing spree that lasted around a year, and this is really what we know, that it started in 1984, but with cases like this, it's often the case that these people started much before, and it is just, that's the year that he was caught. And all of this stopped in 1985 when he tried to steal a car, and a group of people recognized him because one of his victims was actually able to tell the police about what he looked like, and they put out a picture of what he might look like, and people recognized him because he had a very distinct facial appearance. A lot of people thought he was attractive, and he's too scary for me to say he's attractive, but he's kind of attractive. He totaled a number of 14 victims, and the youngest of them was 9 years old. Actually, the first person that he attacked was a 9-year-old little girl, and that's pretty horrible. And I mean, all of it is horrible, but a 9-year-old little girl, like, that just, I wanted to like remain a glimmer of hope as to his humanity, but once I found that out, that really crushed me, and I was just like, oh, it's really hard to do this. But okay, so the youngest person that he attacked was 9 years old, and the oldest person that he attacked was older than 80 years old. So it seems that he just attacked anybody opportunistically. It was just whoever was around. This wasn't like, oh, I'm into little kids, I'm gonna go after little kids. Oh, I'm into older women, I'm gonna go. No, it just seems that it was just a matter of opportunity, whoever was around. He sexually assaulted and murdered all of these people, and it seems that he was especially cruel to people who tried to fight back. He was sentenced to 19 life sentences, and he actually died in prison in 2013 at the age of 53. He died of lymphoma in prison. He actually had a huge fan base while he was in prison, and people would write him a bunch of letters, and one of his biggest fans actually married him in 1996, I believe. And she was actually a reporter, a journalist, and she fell in love with him. And what really inspired this series is that she said that she found him vulnerable and innocent. And when I was just like, vulnerable and innocent, I was just like, that is exactly what somebody would say about a Pisces, and really that's why I'm making the series. So let's look at his chart. I'm gonna put up his chart so you guys could follow along and see what I'm talking about. So if you look here, you can see that he has a Pisces stellium. So he has all these planets here in Pisces. So he has all of these planets here, this Pisces stellium, and he also has Neptune squaring Venus and Mars too, because of how close it is. And he also has Neptune trining his sun. So all of his personal planets were either in Pisces or touched by Neptune in some way. So remember that Neptune is the co-ruler of Pisces, and Neptune is really that planet that dissolves all boundaries. So it really melts the two planets, the energies of the two planets together. So Neptune squaring Mars could have a tendency to be like boundless sexuality, and it's a bit unusual because his Mars is in Aquarius. So Aquarius is that unusual sign. So he has unusual sexuality. And if you have planets in Aquarius, this does not make you a serial killer weirdo. It does not. But adding the Neptune element, and even if you have that, you don't have his life. So this doesn't mean that this is you. He also has Uranus ascendant, Jupiter ascendant, and Mercury ascendant. So his ascendant is actually Sagittarius. So Sagittarius ascendant is what I believe made him kind of ruthless, because Sagittarius is a sign that kind of doesn't know when to stop. So as it is already, he has that Sagittarius ascendant that makes him feel like he can do more than everybody else. And then he has Jupiter there, close to the ascendant. So Jupiter magnifies everything and makes everything bigger. And it could be, sometimes they associate Jupiter with Cancer, because Cancer cells, essentially, they don't know when to stop growing, or they just keep growing and growing and growing. So that's what Jupiter does. So Jupiter just magnifies whatever it touches. It could be something bad, it could be something good. In this case, it was something bad. So Uranus on the ascendant, it could be erratic and prone to accidents or violence. Usually it's accidents on the person. If you have like Mars with the ascendant or Uranus with the ascendant, this could mean that you're very accident prone. It's usually on the person itself. But in this case, it was the other way around. He was the one perpetrating violence on others. He also had Mercury squaring the ascendant, so it brought even more instability to his behavior. Mercury makes everything very fast and twitchy and, what is that word that I'm looking for? Unstable. Mercury destabilizes things. So that coming into his behavior, his ascendant, it made him a very unstable individual. And when he had all of these other things going on, it was just too much. He also had Pluto opposite his sun. So Pluto adds an element of darkness and taboo and mystery to everything. So he had all those dark experiences. Mars, Venus in Aquarius, and Chiron in Aquarius. So he had that stubborn, fixed energy that really made him just stick to whatever it is that he was into, and that's what he was into, and that's what he was gonna do. And he has Saturn unaspected, so that means he has no restrictions. The only aspect that he has to Saturn is a quincunx from Uranus, and Uranus is a non-personal planet. So all of his personal planets and his ascendant, they were unrestricted. And I know that Saturn can be seen as like a bad thing, but don't you think that maybe some restriction could have helped him to not do all the things that he did? It was really like he was just roaming free, doing all of these crazy things that he got in his mind, and there was nothing, stopping him. Usually whenever there's a serial killer, sometimes there's like a wife or a family member that is able to keep the person in check, and for him, it really wasn't him. Pluto in the sun is also sometimes associated with, traumatic experiences from the hands of the father, and it is known that he was physically abused by his dad. He also has Jupiter moon exact, so Jupiter exacerbates anything that it touches, and it can bring optimism, but it could just give you whatever it is that you have and magnify it. And for him, he had that Pisces moon, and amidst all of this suffering and just violence and darkness, it seems to have magnified that darkness in his case. If you look at his chart, he also only has Pluto and Uranus on the other side of the chart. I don't know if you've seen that video of mine where I talk about the quadrants and the hemispheres, but he only has those two planets on the Western hemisphere. So those are the only energies that he really experiences from outside of himself. Everything else is internal. Everything else is like personal. He doesn't have anything on that relational Western hemisphere. So really, if you take all of these things together, the negative experiences that he was living, these are more than negative experiences. These are just atrocious surroundings that he was growing up in. And he was a very susceptible little kid. He had all of that Pisces energy, and he could have been a great artist. Look at his chart. If you look at that chart, I normally would be like, oh, that's such a beautiful chart. And oh, I didn't mention this, but he has all of the Pisces stuff. He has it in the 4th house. And the 4th house is associated with the childhood. And really, sometimes, the Pisces can be seen in a positive light in the 4th house, but other times it can be seen as suffering. It could be because, you know, Pisces is long suffering and has a tendency towards victimization and sometimes self-victimization. When you're a child, you can't self-victimize, but you can be the victim of atrocious adults. And he has that sun in the 4th house making aspect to Pluto in the 10th house. So the 10th and the 4th house are like the parental axis. So it just shows that there was some funky stuff going on with his childhood. His vulnerability couldn't protect him from all of this stuff that was around him. And that's really what I think that happened to this guy. I think that studying astrology is very interesting and useful when it comes to getting to know people and really the psychology of why they are how they are. So that's the video for today, guys. What did you guys think? Did you think that I missed anything in his chart? Did you look at his chart? Do you think I missed anything really important? Any other red flags? Do you have anyone that you want to nominate for this series for another one of the signs? I'm going to be doing this series. How it's going to work is I'm going to do a Venus video for the sign, and then I'm going to do the dark side of the sign, because I just get into a sign and I just want to talk about it. So this week it was Pisces, next week it will be Aquarius. That's the next Venus video that I'm going to be doing. So that's all that I have for you. If you like the video, make sure you give me a thumbs up. It really helps my channel to spread the good news of astrology, and it lets me know what kind of videos you're interested in watching. So I'll see you next time in the Venus and Aquarius video.